I hope that there has been some agreement, not only to form the government, but on the major outlines of the future policies. But I am afraid this is a very bad start, especially that some members of that Council of Ministers are known to be really extremist. I would have liked to see people a little bit more moderate. It would have made things easier. And as your host has said, people really don't have too much confidence in many members, not because they are in that government, but because of the past history of these ministers.
Well, Mr. Kleit, we also have the second proposition on the table to be negotiated, and it's advanced by the March 8 camp that preserves the army, the people, and the resistance tripartite now, forwarded, of course, by Hezbollah to legitimize its arsenal and allow the party to keep and develop its weaponry against the threat of Israel. Now, what will happen to the new cabinet if Hezbollah continues to refuse to abandon the reference to the formula, and taking into consideration that these arms maintain Hezbollah as a sense of security vis-a-vis Israel?
In that sense, that we could say that, and for starters, that Hezbollah is not using its weapons against Syrian people as March 14th people say, or even the Syrian opposition would say, or the terrorist groups. If you see that the places that the Hezbollah soldiers are
active, actually.
What?
Are active,
exactly, are towards the Lebanese-Syrian borders, whether it's now on the ongoing battles in Qalamun or Yabrud. There is also in Damascus, there's also the holy places for Shias, such as the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam and Sayyidah Ruqayya. And the Syrian opposition has been promoting the fact that, well, Hezbollah are attacking in Aleppo, in northern Syria, or in Daraa, or in Hasaka, and so on, just to show that Hezbollah are actually attacking the Syrian people, not only defending their borders as they claim, but facts on the ground show that Hezbollah are only on the borders of Lebanon and Syria. That's one thing. And another thing, that pro-March 14th activists or citizens, even the politicians, they're not actually attacking Hezbollah or the 8th of March just because Hezbollah is intervening in the Syrian crisis. They're not the first one, as Dr. Labaki has said, because there has been facts and many news reports about the intervention of 14th of March politicians and activists and even people who are pro-Assyri, if you would say, that are fighting in Syria even before Hezbollah ever decided to go into Syria in a personal matter, such as going to defend the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam. And even Riyad al-Assad, the ex-FSA commander, has said that Lebanese politician Aqab Sakr has been there in the political body of the FSA even before the revolution has started. That's one thing. That's the second thing. The third thing, that they're not only using this as an excuse to condemn Hezbollah in any way, they're only using this excuse to strip Hezbollah from its weapons. That is actually a very important arsenal, or a very important point in the hands of the Lebanon as whole, not only as 8th of March, because this weapon has liberated Lebanon from the Israeli occupation in the year 2000, and also stopped Israel from reoccupying Lebanon in the year 2006.
Well, Dr. Labaki, like the participation of the government, it does gives Hezbollah the chance to defend its broader interest. Now, that is being part of the decision-making process that allows Hezbollah to preempt any possible debate over its defense strategy. Now, does this mean that it will also allow Hezbollah to direct and manage the power of the Lebanese armed forces on the ground and on Lebanese soil, which is expected to increase following Saudi Arabia's decision to afford the Lebanese army a grant of $3 billion?
Well, first of all, the idea, and we just mentioned it, I think you did mention it, of forming that government is to fight terrorists is to bring stability to the country. So now if we go back to the stalemate, I think it's already a failure. On the second point, everyone is supporting arming the Lebanese army. I think everyone, Hezbollah also would be happy to rely on a strong army who would be able to defend Lebanon from Israel or from any outside threat.
But what if it is for internal use?
Well, actually, I heard from some analysts, colleague analysts, that in the list of arms that was provided, I think everything that could threaten Israel was taken out of the list, like anti-aircraft missiles and so forth. Still, everyone in Lebanon welcomes improving the capacity of the army.
That's okay, because the resistance does have the anti-missile crafts. That's fine with the resistance for that. But now, does Hezbollah's participation in the government, Dr. Labaki, also mean that they now own the key for the governmental positions when a possible future settlement over Syria with whichever party that is going to win in Syria, that allows Hezbollah to negotiate with that regime in Damascus and keep its interests?
But they were much more powerful in the previous one. So if you take it that way, at least statistically in terms of numbers of ministers, they shouldn't have settled. I think they gave up the 996 formula in that spirit of compromise. Of course, they can speak out in the Council of Ministers, but as you know also they have a strong popular support. So, but they gave up a lot, because they were much more represented in the previous government.
Well, Dr. Labaki, before we go, we still have 1 more minute. I want to take an answer from you about what will Hezbollah have gained after this conflict ends. But we have just 1 minute. Could you please tell us, after this conflict in Syria ends, what will be the gains of Hezbollah for intervening?
Well, there will be a loser and a winner. And I don't think there will be a very easy compromise. And you can't be but on the side of the winner.
Well, after the break, we will continue our episode for tonight. Please stay tuned. We will be right back.
Beyond the lines, beyond the surface. Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Time. Variable. Event. The only constant variable in life is change. Broader perspective. Arguments and counter-arguments on our platform.
Global insights. The globe on our platform.
Welcome back to the Middle East stream. We are here with Dr. George Labaki and Mr. Mhamad Kleit. Now, Dr. Labaki, before I go to Mr. Kleit, I want to ask you this about Hezbollah. It is now Hezbollah is very concerned about securing its military supply line to southern Lebanon, which brings arms to the Islamic resistance through Syria. Now, is this why Hezbollah has compromised over some cabinet portfolios in return for allocating leadership of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, which is very essential for voicing Hezbollah's interest internationally, to its March 8 ally, the Free Patriotic Movement?
Well, again, I think the Aoun party will defend the same principles. From that point of view, there is nothing to fear. But we are talking compromise, and compromise requires sometimes difficult sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficult one was, in my opinion, giving up the Ministry of Interior.
Mm-hmm.
That was, at this time of uncertainty and violence, I think that was the most important compromise.
You would have preferred that they would give up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and kept the Ministry of Interior?
Well, I think
they
did not
both.
have the choice. Again, in a compromise, you cannot keep the most important worthy parts and give the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So, was it a good or bad compromise? It will depend on people's willingness to work, on the personality of certain ministers. Are they really going to play by the rules of the game, or they are still sticking to their already set and known previous positions?
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Mhamad Kleit, Hezbollah has proven in the past that it can effectively derail any government activities if it does not get its way. I mean, what happened 3 years ago, if you remember, in 2011, when a national unity government was formed, Hezbollah orchestrated the resignation of more than 1/3 of the cabinet, causing it to collapse. I mean, will that happen again in this cabinet?
Well, this all depends if the security state of Lebanon will be at stake, and as well as the security of Lebanon, not only towards coming from the Syrian side, and also coming from the southern side, from the illegal state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this new cabinet will apply an impossible pressure on Hezbollah that would eventually force it to give in its weapons, then I think the acts that happened back in 2007 and even 2012, people will go to the ground. The pro-resistance activists and people will go to the ground because they're not a small number of people in the end, and we've seen that over the time.
But this time we have terrorist attacks, Mr. Kleit.
And even so, this is our right, because even we have to defend our rights in the end.
Mm-hmm.
This weapon is the right to resist Israel in case of any attacks. And by the way, Lebanon is not fully liberated. We still have 2 or 3 other towns in Sheba and the hills of Kafar Shuba. They are still occupied by Israel. And even if these 2 towns were liberated, these weapons should not be handed in, because the threat of Israel is still on ever since the liberation in 2000, and there has been the evidence of 2006, and Israel, and if you would follow the newspapers and TV analysis on Israeli television, you would see that the Lebanese state is on its top priorities, because it's a neighboring country in the end. At the same time, the word Hezbollah is a huge it's a huge concern for exactly.
Well,
the huge
and
concern for
it
Zionism.
seems that most of the politicians in the country are not actually seeing what the Israeli occupation forces are doing on the borderline down south there. But Dr. Labaki, why did Hezbollah insist? For the past 10 months, Hezbollah was the only party insisting for a cabinet formation. Every time Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah came up to talk with the public, he would say, we want a cabinet formation. Why did they insist when a vacuum of power in Beirut, or the paralysis of the Lebanese state for that matter, would allow it to achieve its strategic goal without being held accountable?
Well, a collapse of the Lebanese state would benefit Israel, because it will introduce chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not in the interest of Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah wants its rights to resistance be recognized, but it's not against having government structure and public policies. And Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has always insisted on that point of view by saying, let's have at least a minimum. Mm-hmm. Take care of government, of people needs, of economic policies. I think this is the first point. The second point, they are interested in creating a national unity to fight terrorism and terror, to isolate terrorists from a pro-peace environment. I think these were the major, in my opinion, priorities of Hezbollah. And so a collapse of the state would not benefit Hezbollah. It's not the idea that a resistant movement could take over.
Exactly.
You know, in Lebanon, it's not on the table. So, on the contrary, everyone has to play its role.
Well, taken from what just Dr. Labaki just said, Mr. Kleit, many analysts are claiming that Hezbollah's apparent concessions are actually a tactical move that will force, excuse me for saying, Sunni leaders to confront radical Sunni groups that are carrying out bombings and causing major instability in the country. Now, what is your take on that?
Well, if you give the government another look, actually, it's not that bad, because in any government formation, the rival party, or if we would say here that's Hezbollah, if we say that this government is pro 14th March, Hezbollah is looking here in a strategical way. Because in any government formation, you have two ways to face this formation, either in a tactical way or in a strategic way. In a tactical way, you'd have names, or as I would say, heavy names, such as the Minister of Interior, Mhamad Mashnu, or even the Minister of
the
Justice Minister. You should have
Ashraf Rifi.
Exactly, Ashraf Rifi. You should have other political persons and with the same political heaviness, such as Nida Nasser Andil, or Rafiq Nasrallah, or even Jamil Al-Sayed. You should have elected these persons to take any governmental role.
But maybe it is these persons who are actually refusing this government. That's why they weren't brought in.
No, because I believe personally that Hezbollah, this is what I mentioned was the tactical way to look at it. But in a strategic way, Hezbollah just wants to form a government in order to take care, as Dr. Labaki has mentioned, to take care of the people's concerns, in order to relieve Hezbollah from internal affairs and be more focused on protecting the Lebanese borders from terrorist attacks, or at least belittling it as much as possible to a certain percentage, and also taking care and getting ready, as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has always mentioned ever since 2006, that the Hezbollah soldiers have always been ready ever since 2006 to face any possible Israeli attack again.
Well, Dr. Labaki, now, if the so-called Sunni leaders in Lebanon are unable to overcome these radicals that we are talking about, who are majorly coming from what they call a Sunni background, which is actually not in that case, in this case, doesn't mean that Hezbollah can use this failure, if it happens, as a pretext for accusing the March 14 alliance of backstabbing the party as a potential justification for any further internal confrontation?
Well, again, your guest has mentioned the tactic and the strategic move. I think it's like gambling. It's you are trying something that might work or not. In the next 2-3 weeks, we don't have too much time.
Exactly.
Because by March 25th, the parliament will have to meet, to convene, to elect the next president. So I think it's kind of risky, in my opinion, but again we go back to the idea of compromise and having people sitting together.
A parliamentary poll before the election of a president? Might that happen?
It happened under Slimane Frangieh. The president Sarkis was elected 6 months ahead of time. But here I think it's too narrow to call. It's within a maximum of 3 weeks. So if that...
but you are sure that we will not see an extent for the term of President Sulaiman?
Look, this will depend. In due time it will be decided. But today I think there is little chance, very little chance. I think in that deal cut, and I think we have to focus a little bit on that, on the all different deals cut, not only forming the government. I am sure that there was an agreement to convene the parliament to elect a president. I think here we have to mention also the strong position of the Maronite patriarch, who spoke out in the presence of the president that a biased government, one-sided government was
and
rejected.
A new president, yeah,
In the presence of the president. And he said that there was a need of a new president. I think this has weighted a lot in the balance. First of all, to encourage Hezbollah and among others to come together and to cut a deal, which is a compromise. And on the other hand, the patriarch has insisted many times that we have to respect constitutional rules. And constitutional rules state very quickly that very clearly that there is a need to elect a new president. So I think, and also in that meeting between Hariri and General Aoun, they have mentioned the issue of presidential elections now.
So from what you're saying, Dr. Labaki, let me go to my final question for Mr. Kleit. It seems that we have to wait and see who the president will be in order to see the political scene, the future political scene in Lebanon. But if we look at what the former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri is doing right now, he is all over the place. He's actually like he's getting ready to become a prime minister again of Lebanon. So might we see actually the agreement working between General Michel Aoun and the former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri?
I believe, actually, if I could elaborate on what Dr. Labaki has said, that yes, that this agreement between, or these meetings between Hariri and Aoun may have helped a lot in creating this agreement, political agreement, to form the government as soon as possible in order to get all the political issues underway, such as making the new electoral law for the parliament, as well as electing the new president. And as you have mentioned, that Saad al-Hariri being all over the place, all over the news, going to countries that are still, that Lebanon is still under their mandate, such as France, I think that the agreement would include that the new forming government, I think in 4 months, Saad al-Hariri would be the prime minister, and
but what would the public do when the president, if he comes the president, Michel Aoun, names Saad al-Hariri as a prime minister?
Well, I think that this government would be sort of the baby steps.
If you allow me, it's lesson 1 in political science. In politics, there
Everything
are
is
permanent interests. There are no permanent friends, in a way.
Exactly.
But my very concern would be, why wouldn't they disclose to all the people out there and tell them that an agreement was reached, when they only tell the public about the negativity found in the rival parties? When they speak to the public, they only speak of the negativity, and then when an agreement happens, it doesn't go out.
Well, I think Mr. Hariri made a statement that he would consult with the patriarch about the presidential elections. I think both Sunni and Shiite communities have realized that if they elect a representative Christian president, he could play a little bit a balance between the two and play a role of someone who diffuses tensions. While the past history of weak, unrepresentative presidents was not really efficient, and we have a very clear example.
They were always taking sides.
So again, I think this is something part of the deal now. Who are the persons to be elected? I think things will unfold and move up and down, and will depend on national, regional, and international.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. George Labaki, Professor of International Law and Political Analyst, for being with us tonight. It was a very interesting episode with you being here, and of course with Mr. Mhamad, Kleit, journalist and political analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. That was our show for tonight. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for more from the Middle East stream.
Sand or dust storms occur above desert zones when the wind kicks up vegetable detritus or solid mineral matter from the dry surface. The most violent sandstorms can carry several thousand tons of dust on a continental scale and at high altitudes. When the dust is trapped within stratospheric wind currents, it can even cross oceans and travel around the world. This is why dust storms can affect regions that have no deserts. During the Great Dust Bowl, which ravaged the United States in the 1930s, the storms were so violent that they crossed the Atlantic and reached Europe. In southeast Australia, the sandstorms that occurred during the 1983 drought swept such vast quantities of dust across the Tasmanian Sea that glaciers in New Zealand's South Island